Welcome, welcome to our program today. Welcome to the 2026 State of the Pike, hosted by the Columbia Pike Partnership. My name is Nikki McDonald, and I have the honor to serve as the chair of the Columbia Pike Board. I am excited for today's conversation, not only to hear from our esteemed panel, but also to be inspired about how we can collectively work together to build upon what Columbia Pike has created in such a special place, including diversity of residents and businesses, our cherished small business and long-established property owners, our new businesses and developments, and over 40,000 people who live in the Columbia Pike corridor. The work of the partnership and the issues that we are discussing today are very important to me, both as a Pike resident myself with my family and as a small business owner as well. I am grateful to each of you for attending today and working with the partnership to support the Pike and our mission. I would very much like to thank the CPP board and staff today, not only for their work in putting together this, what will be a flawless webinar, I'm sure, no pressure, but specifically the Columbia Pike Partnership Board of Directors, most of whom are here in attendance today. Additionally, thank you to our amazing staff, Andrew Schneider, Josue Bastidas, and Sarah Manrique. We're a small but mighty team, and I'm so grateful for the passion and energy that they bring to the Pike. Some of the I'm sure you've all seen them around virtually and in person. They are definitely small but mighty is very understated. Before we begin the panel, I just have a few quick announcements. First, I hope you join us at a number of our upcoming events. We have several signature events coming up this spring. Our annual Pike Progress Lunch is on Thursday, March 26th. We will be celebrating all of the wonderful food that you can find on the Pike, not the park, with food from over 10 Pike restaurants providing for the luncheon. We will be sharing more details soon, and you can learn more about the event on our website. On Saturday, April 18th, we will be celebrating our first ever Pike Culture Fest at Arlington Mill Community Center. More details on that to come as well. And then on Saturday, June 13th, I know it feels far away, but the warm weather is going to be here hopefully before we know it. Please save the date for the 28th Annual Blues Festival, our largest and most exciting signature event of the year. So that is on June 13th. You can see everything up here, and obviously all of this will be in our newsletter. As many of you know, hopefully everyone knows that we host monthly lunch clubs on the last Wednesday of every month. Next week, we will be hosting at El Pike. We also host our monthly happy hours the second Thursday of the month. Our next one is on Thursday, March 13th at Takahashi. It's a restaurant right in Penrose Square that I'm sure many of you have frequented. I also wanted to provide a brief update on the Columbia Pike Farmers Market. Our market is year-round. We're gearing up for a very exciting spring and summer session. I hope you'll find some time to visit the market. It's every Sunday from 9 to 1 p.m. at the intersection of Walter Reed and Columbia Pike in front of the Walgreens. We're signing new vendors, adding new programming, and creating volunteer opportunities starting this spring. And with a much less crowded Pike, shall we say, at the farmers market. Hopefully there will be no heavy machinery to distract us from our delicious coffees and pastries and salmon that we bought the other week when we were there. So we hope to see you there. Okay, and then I'm almost done, I promise. It is now my honor to introduce the 2026 Columbia Pike Partnership's annual sponsors. The Columbia Pike Partnership is funded through both public and private funds. We could not do it without the incredible support and generosity of our individual and corporate funders. The 2026 annual sponsors, which you can see on the slide, are Amazon, Gyre Lynch, Barcroft Apartments, the law firm of Walsh, Colucci, Lubley, and Walsh, the Arlington Food Assistance Center, AFAC, Arlington Community Federal Credit Union, High Sierra Pools, Pentagon MMA, Sonina Properties, Mike Garcia, Mike on the Pike from State Farm Insurance, and True Ground Housing. I would also like to quickly recognize some additional sponsors. Thank you to Kristen Francis Realty Team on their annual sponsorship of the Columbia Pike Farmers Market. John Murphy and Washington Workplace for sponsoring our lunch clubs and happy hours. And Lola Reinsch, Gerald Pierce, and the Reinsch Companies for sponsoring the Pike Progress Lunch. It is still possible to be an annual sponsor, and we will have additional sponsorships available for all of our events throughout the year. Please reach out to Andrew or check our website for more information on sponsoring. Okay, so a lot of that you will find again in the newsletters and just be able to talk with the team about any of that. But now what we all really came here for, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the chair of Arlington County Board, Matthew DeFerenti. Mr. DeFerenti was first elected to the Arlington County Board in 2018. Matt served as chair in 2021 and has started his most recent chairmanship last month. I was fortunate to be able to spend a little time with Matt and Andrew last week for lunch and was so impressed by his passion, thoughtfulness, and vision for the future of Arlington. We're super excited to be able to hear from him directly today. So I will turn it over to Matt now.
Thank you, Nikki. And I think someone will let me know if I think you can hear me via thumbs up. All right. And via Takis's nod. So I am thrilled to be able to join you, and I'm excited. With due respect, I know that all of my colleagues want to be here, but I'll just recognize Takis Karantonis, who lives like, I think, 300 yards off of directly Columbia Pike. Um, but we all love the Pike, and it is the soul, you might say. It's the heartbeat in a lot of ways of Arlington, and I'd love to just share a few words before we start the panel. I'm eager to listen in and think about what's next. I do think we have to name, even as we want to be place-based and focused, that there is a broader context that is having an impact on our economy as a whole. And I just want to kind of recognize that briefly. The macroeconomic pressures we're facing and decision making across the river in Washington, as well as technological shifts, all are having an impact on the economy that we're working on. The bottom line is that this is a new normal that continues to impact businesses, revenue streams, and ultimately the wallets of our residents and our businesses countywide. Um, I have and will continue to say that stabilizing our economy and positioning Arlington for a strong and resilient recovery from what we're going through right now is one of my and the board's top priorities. We came together and we have four loose priorities. One of those is serving our most vulnerable. Another is basic services. Another is our economy. And we know that we cannot thrive as a community for all without an economy that is growing and doing so in an inclusive manner. Um, I have a few big picture thoughts I've shared once or twice before. I'll keep them very brief and be eager because some of you may have heard them, but they're also still relevant. And I think it's important to just name them briefly. Um, First, uh, economic development wise, we have to foster and reposition from the office space moment that we have been in. Uh, Arlington of Virginia has the most percentage office in our tax base of anywhere in Virginia, any locality in Virginia. So that means we're facing challenges. We have embraced adaptive reuse of properties. We did 6 projects last year. They reduced our commercial vacancy rate by a full point, and that's important and relevant to the broader economic ecosystem that we operate in along the Pike and across the county. Um, that is through our commercial market resiliency initiative, We have to continue that. That continues to be a priority of mine as well as the full board. Um, Job growth, and we know that small businesses are the vast majority of our jobs in Arlington and in communities across the country, and indeed as in the country as a whole. We'll continue to invest in emerging tech ecosystem, which is important for our economy as a whole. Small business support is critical, and I can think of that clearly as we think about the last years on the Pike and the construction that we have reached substantial completion on. Um, we will also work on attracting international and domestic businesses to help our economy grow as a whole. Our tourist industry is important, and it's important to the thriving of the Pike as well as our county as a whole. We have legislation in Richmond that we're working on to continue to help us thrive in that area. This year's celebrations of the nation's 250th anniversary and is an opportunity for us that can help drive tourism recovery. The county stands ready to work with you all to attract visitors to our hotels, restaurants, and destinations on Columbia Pike and throughout the county. And lastly, I think we're going to hear in our panel significantly from on the questions of the future of retail, supporting small businesses, and placemaking is critical to that. I'm thrilled to hear Nikki describe the various events, and it makes me know that Andrea and Josue and Sarah are putting shoe leather in to really create the social connectivity that's important. So we will work with our bids, but also critically Columbia Pike Partnership to continue investing in programming, public art, and the creative use of underutilized space in our commercial districts and in the Columbia Pike corridor. I'll just conclude by saying it so happens this year that in addition to being chair, we all care about the Pike, and that's evident through the engagement of all five of us on the county board. This year I was lucky enough, and I'm thrilled to be able to be liaison from the board to take a sort of a point role in coordinating the effort to move us forward. And the Pike has so many strengths, and we've been in a good space, but certainly there's eagerness to move beyond the substantial completion of the construction work on the Pike to move forward with some of the redevelopment and development projects that I think are going to help us move to that next stage that we all are wishing for. So, as your liaison, I'm honored to work with and for you. I want to stop there and hand it back to, I believe, Andrew, who may be going next.
Thank you so much, Matt, for your remarks and your continued leadership and support of the Pike and specifically Columbia Pike Partnership. My final role this morning is to introduce the Columbia Pike Partnership's Executive Director, Andrew Schneider. Since taking the helm of the partnership in December 2023, Andrew has heralded a range of new programming, advocacy on behalf of our businesses and residents, and for those of you who know him, a seemingly endless supply of energy and passion for our community. I see a lot of nodding heads from the from the screen above. So if you haven't met Andrew, I assure you that we are certainly in good hands, and there's a lot more to come. So I will stop there, and please take it away, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and thank you really to each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy lives to be here today. And I think both Nikki and Matt touched on all of the various stakeholders and constituencies that make up such a vibrant Columbia Pike community. And in particular, thank you to our county partners who I see sprinkled throughout my um, participant list, and our partners at Arlington Economic Development and the county board members that Matt mentioned. And it's really, we could not do it without our partners the county at the county. Also, thank you to all of our residents who are here who have endured and believed in the power of the Pike for many, many years, longer than before there is form-based code or a neighborhoods plan. We have residents who have been here for their whole lives, and we understand that the core of what we do is about the people. And obviously to our businesses, our legacy businesses, our small businesses, our newer businesses, our developers, our property owners, because the ecosystem that we represent here and that you represent is what makes Columbia Pike such a special place. And as Matt kind of alluded to, and as we've all heard about, there's a lot going on in the world. And I really think all the things that trouble us in the world, the antidote can also often be found on the Pike. Community, friendship, outdoor spaces, and for me, most importantly, great food. And I'm really excited about the future of the Pike. I think one of the things that we've heard alluded to as well is that the construction on the Pike was painful for many of us, but now we are eager to turn the page and look forward about what is the potential and how do we reach that potential together. And that's why we're so excited to have this group of speakers today who really represent the best and the brightest and the most interesting and the most creative minds, not only in the DMV, but across the country. And I'm going to introduce them all now, and then we'll hear a few words from a few of them before we break into our panel conversation. But our panelists today, and I'll wait for my special slide to show up, are first, we're going to have many of you already know her because she's doing such a great job over at Arlington Economic Development, but our acting director of economic development for Arlington, Kate Angie. Matt Wagner is Director of Innovation for Main Street USA, which helps communities like Columbia Pike, but across the country, building robust, resilient Main Street communities. And he'll talk a little bit about his work and some of the surveys that they've done of small businesses. Dr. Elizabeth Morton from George Washington University has been a leader on sustainable and preservation of businesses. She's a former member of the Arlington County Planning Commission, so she has a local perspective. And then we also are so lucky to have Kim Stein from KNLB, a retail broker here in the District of Columbia region, and Ian Callender, who's built community throughout his whole career, including in Virginia, DC, and elsewhere. And between the five of them, we are going to have a real opportunity to learn, compare, and be inspired about what comes next for the Pike, because that's what I'm most looking forward to, is what comes next. And before we break into our panel conversation, we'll hear from Kate, then Matt, then Dr. Morton, and then we'll break into our conversation. So with that, thank you all for being here, and let me turn it over to Kate Angie from Arlington Economic Development.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. I think, Josue, we could advance the slide. I'm just going to let you do that. You can jump to the next slide. So I think Matt did a great job of just the big picture of where we are economically. And when Andrew reached out and said, hey, I want to do something different for the state of the Pike this year and really focus and zoom in a little bit on retail and restaurant sort of economic activity. So I wanted to set some context for those of you that may or may not know. When we think about the Pike, it is just beyond, it's not just the road, it's the neighborhoods that surround it. And it's really made up of about 42,000 people, 18,000 households, average income 143,000 a year, and average household size about 2.3 people, and a median age of 36. And these numbers are important because as we think about retail and we think about all the business activity on the Pike, I once learned, I was trained as a planner, and retail follows rooftop. So who lives here and nearby is a big driver of what can happen from a retail perspective. If we go to the next slide, some quick stats in terms of what's out there today. There's about just under 1 million square feet of retail, and about 65% of that is considered the legacy retail, and that is retail that's been there from before 2008. About 35% of it is what we call kind of that newer built, and a lot of that newer built retail is actually happening within these mixed use developments where you have residence on top, and you have ground floor retail. On the books right now, there's another 33,000 square feet in the pipeline. When we think about the health of the retail market, it's actually fairly strong on the Pike. We all know we did experience a loss with the departure of the Harris Teeter, and that did push the vacancy rate up a little bit to 10%. But without that, the vacancy is very strong at about 3.9%. And then when you look at that legacy retail vacancy, it's very low at only 2.7%. So if you're someone looking to find a place on the Pike, it's not that easy, particularly if you're a small business. So that means demand is very strong. The retail mix that's out there, it's a combination of grocery, drugstores, convenience stores. It's a lot of local serving retail, as we like to say. And regional destination retail is not really happening. That's happening kind of, at the malls. It's happening down further in Bailey's Crossroads and other locations. This truly is a more neighborhood serving retail mix as it currently stands. From the demands perspective, again, what I mentioned is that just that little area can draw in, 42,000 people. And so there's an additional 1,100 residential units that are in the pipeline that becomes another part of the demand moving forward. If we go to the next slide. The other big thing, and the reason that the Pike is continuing to evolve, is that it is a master planned corridor, if you will, that has been moving slowly from a traditional kind of suburban, auto-oriented corridor and retail that reflected that in terms of single story with parking in the front, to more of a mixed-use corridor. With that redevelopment, you are seeing a significant increase in value that's being generated in terms of the assessed values. So all this is showing you is some of those recent developments and the assessed value change over time, which is pretty significant. So when we think about redevelopment and we think about the success along the Pike, this is where we see a lot of uptick in terms of that increased property value, increased revenue generation potential happening. If we go to the last side, from an economic development standpoint, you usually hear me talking about kind of business attraction and the tech ecosystem and small businesses, but retail is a piece of the puzzle. And one of the things I just wanted to kind of point out that I'm sure you're going to hear from the great panelists that are here with us today is that it does create jobs and it drives tax revenue, but it also contributes significantly to community vibrancy and, quite frankly, identity. When you're able to kind of go to your local serving shop, whatever that is, or retail, you get to know the folks and it creates kind of that bond. So it's very important from that perspective. The other thing is, a lot of times, I don't know about you, but my first job was in retail. A lot of us start, whether we're young or straight out of college or wherever, however our path gets us to that first job. The retail restaurant community is often a very welcoming place for anybody. So it's a great thing to have in the community. And the other thing, and I think this is so important right now, is that retail is a place where innovation actually happens. We don't talk about that a lot, but to be a successful kind of retail shop front in today's world means that you are constantly innovating and changing to meet new customer demands and new kind of needs. And so from a, building of and I shouldn't say ecosystem, but I'm going to say it, a strong small business ecosystem and just business vibrancy generally, that sort of entrepreneurial spirit that it takes to be a restaurant or retail owner is critical. So with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Matt Wagner to talk a little further. So thank you all.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And I just want to thank Kate for like passing off the baton, talking about like ecosystems and retail innovation right up my alley, Kate. So thank you so much for that. Also, I just want to thank Andrew and everyone at the Pike for inviting me here to speak. You've got my bio, so I'll spare you that monologue, but only to say that Main Street America, the organization where I work, is a national organization formed more than 46 years ago. Actually, it's America's largest dedicated group to revitalization of America's downtowns and neighborhood business districts, working throughout the country in about 1,600 communities and representing more than 250,000 small businesses operating within our network, from small towns in the Midwest to larger districts in, the District of Columbia, as well as, of course, Northern Virginia. And I'll also just note that Virginia has a really strong statewide coordinating program that's housed within Virginia's housing and community development. So when Andrew and I spoke, I thought just to kind of like key things in the beginning was to really direct some of my remarks to a lot of our survey work that we do. I think it's rather unique. And one, it's a national survey that we conduct twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. So we're getting ready to launch our spring here in late March. What's also critical, it's frankly the largest sample and insights that come from what we think of as like true, real Main Street businesses, typically less than 10 employees. And most of the time when you're reading national surveys, whether from like the U.S. Chamber or the National Retail Federation, or even think about how we define small businesses like at the Small Business Administration, it doesn't often pick up sort of the mom and pop Main Street businesses that I think in our head we think about, but their insights, their stories, their challenges and opportunities typically don't show up in most research. So I thought I would do just a couple quick points from our fall 2025 survey that might set the table a little bit, help with just providing you some additional insights on where their headspace is at. Our survey that was done in November of 2025 of about 1,300 small Main Street businesses. And one of the big things that jumps and continues to jump out at us, and given Kate's discussions around like tech and retail innovation, one of the big findings and continues to be the sort of disparities, I would say, in tech adoption with Main Street businesses. The gaps continue to widen. We started to really see this in May of 2020. I won't speak to what that time period, as many of you are aware, what was happening then, and where we were seeing deep challenges with just access to digital infrastructure and as well as having any sort of web e-commerce digital presence outside of perhaps a Facebook page. Even Google profiles were difficult to find at that time for a lot of Main Street businesses. And so where we're seeing right now is continued disparities with like AI adoption. And so according to Thrive, which is another sort of marketing analytics group, they did a survey recently of 550 small businesses, largely between 10 and 100 employees, and were showing about 68% of tech adoption. And what's key there is, yes, that's like asking for content or whatever, but a lot of their folks were also doing things like data analysis, inventory, those kinds of things that are imperative if you want to be more strategic. And a case of really, vendor issues and supply chain issues now, being able to manage your inventory is obviously very, very critical. And what we're picking up on is that most Main Street businesses, in fact, 53% of small business respondents in metro Main Street areas are using it occasionally, and only 46% in more rural areas outside of metro are using AI. And again, most of that, when we dive a little bit deeper, is only in like content generation, ideas for social media posts or marketing ideas, very little in the analytic space, which is, obviously moving away from generative. In e-commerce, I think one of the critical factors is while we've closed some of the gap in digital adoption, we're still not seeing a lot in sort of like e-commerce sales from Main Street bricks and mortar businesses. And while we keep preaching, bricks and clicks, still about 90% of Main Street businesses aren't seeing really sales. And those that do see sales, it's really less than 10% of their overall revenue stream. So big thing, I think, as we think about like how do we support small businesses is continued evolution in tech adoption just overall there. When we look at like confidence and sales, and I think, Matt from, Arlington County was sort of hitting on this, you know, whether you're Columbia Pike or anywhere else, you don't live within a bubble. Our businesses are impacted by more macro forces, certainly. And while we can sort of help in that regard, that still is ever present. And what we were seeing in the fall of 2025 was our lowest confidence numbers and how they were forecasting their future. It was only slightly higher than spring of 2025. And we all know what was happening in 2025 relative to like tariffs and those kinds of things, and continued uncertainty. So that persists with Main Street businesses, and over a third, 38% of Main Street business owners are reporting decreased revenues over the third quarter of 2025, so August basically through October 2025, and 45% were reported decreasing net profits over that same period. And so a lot of that is really getting at the expense side of the equation, even though we're seeing some appearance, obviously, of sort of the K economy, if you want to look at it that way, depending on the business sector and business typology in terms of customers. However, I do think there's a silver lining. I don't want to leave us with doom and gloom. I think there's a lot of opportunity there for sure. And one of them, frankly, exists with what you're gathering here, and that you've got an organization in place that's dedicated to working with your small business owners and managing the district and thinking about sort of where we need to shift, where we need to have agility. How do we support a true ecosystem from a small business perspective? And what we found in our research is that business owners who indicated they received some support from a local business serving organization like a Main Street, their average confidence is a full 1 point higher than those that aren't being serviced or have any access to those. And 64% of small businesses receiving support are actually seeing much higher revenues than those that aren't receiving any kind of support. So it does matter. This work is really important to both building resiliency within our small business, but also just helping them to scale and thrive in ever challenging environments. So I thank you for the opportunity to kind of sort of do an intro here, and look forward to our questions, our discussions a little bit later. And I think I'm passing it on to Elizabeth. All right.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about a concept called legacy businesses. And nice to see some of you. I used to be very involved with Arlington Civic Affairs. And another way I've studied this in the context of Arlington is through a couple of graduate studios. I teach in urban planning programs. What the site that Matt shared for me is actually a repository of some student research projects that I've led. And that can lead you to some of the research and oral histories that students have done on legacy businesses in Arlington, and also in the Clarendon history of the former Vietnamese businesses that used to be in the Little Saigon neighborhood. I think that this concept of legacy businesses, I started talking about this about 10 years ago in 2016, and I'm happy to see that there's interest. The student research got incorporated a bit into some of the Langston Boulevard plans, and I have to really give so many kudos to the Langston Boulevard Alliance, who has picked up and run with this concept with their People and Places project. So I encourage you to check that out. Next slide, please. I did during COVID, sort of as a labor of love with a little funding, a national overview report of what legacy business programs are around the country. It really quickly became outdated because this kind of program has had really sort of explosive growth. I'm happy to share this report with people. I've been keeping up with the field. The concept of legacy business, it's interesting because Kate mentioned in Arlington, I think AED calls basically older businesses legacy businesses. And sometimes there's an implication these are outdated. I'm not sure that's the case in Arlington. But in communities across the country, they're adopting this term to really think about what kinds of small, independent, long-standing businesses a community cherishes and wants to support. We think in historic preservation about how to save a building. We have some tools for that. We're increasingly thinking about how to save affordable housing. Not really so many tools to think about saving and promoting the character of small independent businesses. But many communities are motivated by the sense that, excuse me, something's slipping away that they care about. So next slide, please. It's interesting thinking about the words people use when they're adopting a legacy business program. Next slide, please. So these are some phrases that some communities have used. Chair DiFerranti talked about the soul of a community, which is what San Francisco uses. I like here this array of concepts, both thinking about stability and character, but also dynamism. Legacy businesses are seen as serial entrepreneurs. They're doing something right often. I like a quote that's not here from the city of Sarasota that says, legacy businesses exemplify growth and prosperity. So not just trying to freeze something in time and, not have change, but thinking about rewarding the businesses that have contributed to community character in all of our lives, often at the street level, is what communities are after. So next slide, please. So just quickly, this has been touched on by some of the other speakers. Why is this something that's a policy imperative or something that local advocates should get involved with? Legacy businesses contribute to our life in a lot of ways. They're third places. In the case of places like Columbia Pike, they're often a springboard and a lifeline for immigrant communities. I think it's worth noting we've all been more aware lately of the ways that there have been disparities in wealth accumulation vis-a-vis housing. Pardon me, often, not always, but businesses are a source of equity and can be sort of an alternative source of intergenerational wealth. Next slide. Sorry. So the chart here illustrates really what I think is sort of exponential growth. These are only public sector programs that I've illustrated here in this chart. But between the very first program, which was introduced in San Francisco back in 2014, the number of localities that have adopted these increased to, I think, just added one yesterday to 30. These are often advocated also by nonprofits, business organizations like BIDS and Main Streets. Local news organizations also have launched their own program, maybe a good project for Earl Now. These programs offer an array of informational, promotional, technical assistance, financial, and some planning and regulatory approaches. So I'm going to just quickly go through two more slides to give you an overview of how these programs are working. Next slide, please. Typically, when you think about what's the definition of a legacy business, generally people talk about a business that might have been established 10 to 25 years ago. There's often a maximum size. There's an independent criteria. We don't want chains. Generally, some sort of contribution to cultural significance and some kind of commitment to community character is a criteria. These can be nominated by elected officials or crowdsourced, or people can nominate themselves. Depends. These programs vary widely from community to community. Next slide. And the final slide just gives you a big overview of what is the outcome of legacy business programs. In most communities, there's definitely an education component. There might be a legacy business registry, maps, or tours, raising people's awareness of these businesses and their histories. Most communities have some sort of promotion. There are stickers you can put on your windows, social media. Awards are a really big part of legacy business programs. Working up the chain in terms of level of funding and intervention in public policy. Some communities increasingly are offering incentives like grants to legacy businesses, maybe priority consideration in a public program, priority in procurement, for example, they have in some cities. Technical assistance and succession planning, peer-to-peer. Matt mentioned AI for a while. No one knew how to do social media. So, finally people are figuring that out. But now I think AI is a sort of ripe new frontier for people who are busy running their businesses and don't have time to learn. Also some planning tools. There are things sort of approximating community benefits agreements or different kind of special consideration when development is coming in if they're going to displace legacy business. And cities increasingly are trying to think about these programs vis-a-vis areas in which they're sensing economic and cultural displacement. And happy to share more information about this, but I'm going to wrap it up there. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morton. Thank you to Matt and to Kate for your remarks. I think one of the things that we hear in these remarks is that we're thinking about the macro, right? We heard everybody reference the macro. Matt referenced what happened with both shutdowns, cuts to the federal workforce, and then we've had distinct things that have happened on the Pike. And then you put that in the context of the greater world and the greater economy, and these things land different ways in different places. And what we're trying to figure out on the Pike is how they impact the Pike. And I'm very curious to hear from our other panelists. So we'll get the spotlight up for our five panelists. And as they do that, I'm just going to toss out our first question, really to hear from Ian Callender and Kim Stein. Kim, just from your perspective, talking to businesses and landlords every day, what is the vibe that you're hearing broadly in the DMV, and then preferably positively, but also hearing about the Pike, and how do we approach these issues on the Pike and what you're hearing?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to kind of hearing a little bit more, and it's been very educational so far. I would say in general, there's absolutely a renewed excitement around how people can look at the future of retail, whether that be selling an actual good, going to some sort of experience, or enjoying some kind of food, right? I think those are kind of the three main ways that we're looking at retail today. And I think one of the things that a lot of people always ask themselves is this something that I would enjoy for myself? And if it is, how do I bring that enjoyment to others? And I think that, that's how you really create community. That's really how you enable people to see the potential and to frequent something. So, I think that that's really where the opportunity exists. And the Pike, I think, has a unique place for that in that, there are a lot of legacy businesses, but there are also a lot of places where people can start anew. And I think that that's a really unique part of how retailers look at space. When I'm out with clients and, we're driving around places, they love to see the history. They love to understand, the burger business that's been open for 50 years. And I think that that really helps show them that there's a lot of potential, whether they're a new business or potentially, somebody who has multiple locations and looking to grow in a new place.
Thanks, Kim. And I think for Ian, your perspective, and also somebody who's built community or helped foster community in places that maybe were more of a revitalization project, or where there hadn't been the kind of businesses that you had brought in the past. And maybe you could just share from your perspective what you've seen works or how you've done it in your life.
Yeah, and good afternoon, everyone. And I think Kim definitely teed it up properly. It is a three-way street, right? You have a user, and then you have a property owner, and then you have a broker who usually represents the property owner. Some of the successes that we've seen in our time in Washington, D.C. has always been in communication with the property owner, usually with leases. That's a very daunting process, legally, for both sides. And usually when you see a vacant storefront, it's in limbo. It's in flux of going through the legalese or litigation of why this tenant is in default or why they haven't paid their rent. And usually that can be a 6 to 12 month period of just stagnation. So we often try to come in right in that period where the property is now back in the onus of the owner, and try to initiate these types of conversations to ignite activity while a commercial broker is doing their due diligence of finding a long-term tenant. That's been our sweet spot for the past, 12 to 14 years. Luckily, a lot of the projects that we've done have been with some big box developers who have multiple properties across DC, Maryland, and Virginia. But then you have your smaller landlords who, like on the Pike, they're one property owners. They really want to ensure that the replacement of a vacant storefront is something that fits the regime of the Pike or of the retail resilience that we're looking for. So it is a dynamic, a delicate dance, if you must, but I think it's something that the Pike is definitely right for.
Thank you so much. I think that is so helpful. I think as you can see from the questions that are coming in the chat, from the questions that we received, and there's questions about like what's going on in specific locations. but the bigger, deeper questions that I think we're trying to get to is how do you move the needle, right? And
Mhm.
we're trying to move the needle in the context of all the things that we've heard about already, micro, macro situations. We heard a little bit from Dr. Wagner talking about, well, AI is a differentiator, and we know that there are different things that landlords are looking for, brokers are looking for. But what are some ways from all of your vantage points or from the different vantage points like Ian talked about that the needle can be moved? And we hear about a lot of ideas. Well, why can't you give them lower rents, or why can't you waive this, or fast track these permits, or protect this business, or make this landlord do that? And that's a lot of magical thinking sometimes because we live in the reality, we live in the world of reality. But what are some things that you've observed that do move the needle from any of these vantage points, whether it's county, partnership, businesses, property owners? I don't know who wants to take that first. Um, I see Ian shaking his head. So if you want to start that, if you want to tee us up, and then we can see who else
Sure.
starts to nod.
Yeah, I think if we kind of take a step back and look at things, you mentioned earlier, America's 250th, right? Or Cherry Blossom Festival, something that everyone wants to dial into, whether they're in Arlington, Washington, D.C., or Prince George's County. It can take some type of cultural happenstance that gets everyone kind of excited to be immersed in their neighborhood, not necessarily one specific brick and mortar that we're trying to draw attention to, but something that can stretch from edge to edge on the Pike. I remember as a kid just going to, the Taste of DC downtown and having that experience. And then now in DC we have our Art All Night Festival, which is a citywide festival that touches all 8 wards. And last year, 190,000 people experienced art in every inch and area of the city for 1 or 2 days, Friday and Saturday in September. So it could just take something that brings in the community as a whole and allows people to traverse the Pike naturally and go into multiple businesses, and you'll see an uptick in those businesses and revenues grow, and then that's kind of how I think we can reimagine spurring activity on the Pike.
I think another thing is, I work with a lot of landlords as well as tenants. And a lot of times when we work for our landlords, the retail space on the ground floor is really the front door of their building. And if they're trying to lease office space, if they're trying to lease residential space, whatever they're trying to do upstairs, that's the first impression that somebody gets. And so, for a lot of times, my landlords will say, I really want a coffee shop here. Wouldn't it be so nice if, the person occupying upstairs, when they saw my building, saw this coffee shop? And, that's where I'm able to then go to a tenant and say, look, I don't necessarily need every cent out of the deal, right? I still need rent. This is not free. However, it's really something that helps get somebody interested in what's happening upstairs. And from a retail perspective, that's really, I think, how a lot of my landlords that are more forward thinking and, are really more focused on the bigger picture are seeing some of their retail spaces. And I think it's a trend that I would like to see more. But it can only happen in certain instances. There's, certain ownership groups that they have to get every cent out of the deal. But, it's my job as a broker to help educate both sides as to what could really bring the most value, not only to that building, but then to the rest of that block. Andrew, I think you're speaking on mute.
I've been doing Zoom for 6 years and I still do that.
We all do it.
Yeah, so I I don't know if Matt or Dr. Morton or Kate has other examples about where the government or the partnership or a third party can come in and say they want a coffee shop, they're worried about the rents. What can we do to facilitate this opportunity that everybody's going to win from? And Matt, I don't know if you're about to speak, but you also are on mute, and then we'll go from there.
I can take a crack. I mean, I think I think it's quite sort of diverse, the different approaches, depending on which sort of part of the system you're focused on. We've got programs from around the country that are doing more, especially in terms of trying to control displacement, where you've got a lot of like property ownership coming in from programs. You look at like an Alapata down in Miami that's been very aggressive to sort of protect the brand identity, the cultural identity that gives it life and spirit. And so, there's a real estate play there. We're seeing a lot emerging on the financial capital component, where we're able to bring more equity from the tenant side into the deal, with what we sort of reference as customer capital, leveraging sort of traditional crowdfunding, but in a new way of thinking of as customer capital, especially for those where you're getting a lot of demand from the community to support something, especially one that's sort of high volume, whether it's grocery or what have you, where local folks can take advantage. And it's been an underutilized sort of part of the financial economy. And then just we have other programs that are doing a lot on like rental subsidy, where they're the sort of gap filler between where the market rate rent is, but the reality of where maybe the market is on the sales side, and allowing some time for that to catch up, and equalize, so that again identity can be preserved, and business that you're really trying to fill with a strategy can work there as well.
That's great. Kate or anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I think traditionally what the county has been able to do is to work with organizations like Columbia Pike Partnership or Langston Boulevard or others to just provide as many of those tools and resources to the small business community. We've got a very strong biz launch team, and one of the things, I can't remember who said it, the digital disparity that still exists with many of our small businesses. So we still get a lot of calls and do a lot of technical assistance to help close that gap, if you will. So I would say that, more of what we do to make it easier for, if you're a business that's looking to start and or trying to locate on the Pike and or you're already there, how do you know what resources are available? And I think, Andrew, you and I have talked about like strengthening kind of the role that you guys can play as the concierge to some of that, by partnering with us and partnering with others. But I also know, Matt, you just described a whole lot of additional tools and support that could be deployed that are certainly worth, I think, exploring.
Before we move on, I don't know if Dr. Morton, you had anything else you wanted to add. It's okay, but you did mention in your slides about incentives, and I just didn't know if you had any examples that you wanted to share.
Sure. Places like increasingly the bigger cities are sometimes giving grants of $10, $20, $50,000 to businesses who they've designated as legacy businesses, sometimes with a certain purpose in mind, sometimes not. In San Francisco, they actually give grants to landlords who agree for a long-term lease if you're a legacy business. So those are some kind of incentives. There's also just sort of planning incentives where you may have funds that are directed specifically, again, to a legacy business. And sometimes this legacy definition could just be like 10 years old. Basically, something that contributes to the character through some sort of process. It's not arbitrary. They come up with a process for deciding, and the public is often involved and engaged. So there's a certain amount of just steering maybe the programs you've already established toward something that you can consider a public asset.
Well, I think we can all speak, especially anybody who works with the county or for the county knows that you definitely have to tell people more than once and remind people and reshare the assets that we already have existing. So it's something that we spend a lot of time is just connecting the dots. And I do think, to Kate's point and others, that is something that we can continue to work on. Switching a little bit, which is adjacent to this, thinking about innovation, and I know, Matt, you're the director of innovation at Main Street USA, but there's ways that we can reduce friction, but there's also ways that we can think of new ideas or new ways. And I think, Ian talked a little bit about that just by having cultural anchors. I know you've worked with like micro manufacturing, but what are some other ways that communities can encourage additional innovation? Because there we do have low vacancy on the Pike. We also have properties that are probably vacant but not on the market, which is another issue. But like, how do we start to create new opportunities that may or may not be as obvious as the obvious opportunities?
Yeah, I think one of them, maybe the, I don't know, call it the easiest lift to kind of like spark some of that is if you do have like a vacant space and an agreeable um, property owner is to create like sort of testing lab, whether it's pop-up shared space or design sort of charrette space where a community can come in and you can engage more on sort of either complex issues or what have you, but use it as temp space. I think so many times we feel like the only way to get there is like to have all this sort of fresh and all built out. And sometimes actually the most creative spaces are kind of the dirty, dingy, the lights are on, but that's about it. So like, I would just start there and be willing to our whole philosophy around innovation is that innovation occurs at the crossroads of people's different backgrounds and experiences. So just ensure also that it's not like a siloed approach to kind of thinking about the district and what you're trying to accomplish either in that space. That's another thing you can do is just sort of like test concepts out in a space. You could crowdsource with the community, whether folks like it or not. That's also been done. So yeah, I would start and just get started. Think about it as like incremental development.
Yeah, I like that, Matt. Incremental development. I think some of the things that we've done historically have always been like filling a void in a specific neighborhood. Some of the projects, and I'll actually put a link in the chat from just our real estate page that kind of has an example of all of the projects that we've done in the district and Tyson's. But going to Southwest before the wharf was built and creating an arts environment didn't really exist. Performing arts was specific in the Southwest neighborhood. But then introducing something through a creative placemaking of doing a mural on a dilapidated church that was built in 1886. Shifting to Georgetown, it's known for its retail experiences, but not in the entry part of Georgetown across from the Four Seasons. And identifying something that was a void where we're introducing local restaurateurs, having a food truck or a food trailer, gifting them with that food truck and food trailer through a Uber Eats program. And now we have this incubator program where businesses don't necessarily have to pay a retail or a lease or rent, and they're generating, revenue in that environment. And then recently we repurposed a legacy CVS, which, the CVS business was leasing from Howard University. They were the property owners. They vacated their lease and moved across the street to a newer building, leaving this building kind of in a, blighted state. And then in partnership with Howard University, again, the property owner, we were able to access the space, secure some funding through the university, and now we've turned it over into a community amenity space, which is usually the phrase or the term that we use because, like everyone's saying, and I'm even just looking in the chat, there are some voids that's missing on the Pike, and there are some easy wins, but it does start with getting that access. Once you have it, and then we're able to, really kind of look at it from a micro macro, like you said, Andrew. It's a game changer.
Kim, I don't know. Oh, I was just going
Yeah,
to say,
I agree with Ian. I mean, I represent CVS. I was part of the team that moved CVS into their new space so that Ian could do what he wanted to do. And I think he's underselling what he did there and all of the people that came together to help that happen. And I
Yeah.
think, things like the Columbia Pike Partnership in partnership with Arlington Economic Development, it really takes a village to do these things. Again, I think Ian is underselling how hard it is to put these events on and to do them. And it also, as I'm looking at places for clients of mine, when these pop-up events happen and people, get excited and they post, and it really does strengthen a neighborhood.
Mhm.
And it's, I think, one of the greatest things that can happen. But the challenge is like, it doesn't oftentimes make a lot of money, right? Like, this is not something that anyone's doing for money. You're doing it for the activation, you're doing it for the future. And you have to believe in that future. So, using Ian's Howard example, Howard owns multiple parcels in that area. There's development on multiple parcels in that area. And it really is kind of a first step to improving how all of that is working. And so I think that there has to be kind of a larger conversation on the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this happening? And then kind of looping back, to somebody like Ian who can actually pull it off. Because I think that's the other thing that I've seen time and time again is, I think people have a lot of spirit and they have a lot of desire, but to actually pull this off, it really takes a village.
Kim, just following up on that very quickly, just what are the things that make it easier for a property owner or a landlord to agree to a project like that? Because they're taking risk too, they're deferring or
Yep.
revenue. And so, what are the things that you've seen that have been, okay, well, we're willing to support this?
So I think it's two things. One, I think if there is kind of a larger development at play, right? And, it's a reason to do it because you're trying to show somebody that there is a community here, there are customers here that are going to come to your business. I think it gives everyone a testing ground, right? I think that's what Ian was saying. It's a testing ground. So there's definitely motivation there. But I also think that the motivation comes in the ability to want to try to activate a space that has otherwise been dormant, but it has to be with someone who knows what they're doing. I've had multiple situations where, unfortunately, a landlord has been left with, a cleanup from an event that has cost them several tens of thousands of dollars, and
Mhm.
then nobody wants to do it again. And so, in order to get a group like Ian to do something like this, it's everything. And, as much as people say, oh, of course we'll clean up, of course we'll make sure that, the fire alarm doesn't go off, or of course something happens, right? And so I think, the person that you're working with has to take responsibility, and that's how the landlord gets comfortable.
That's very helpful. I don't know if anybody has anything specifically they want to ask that question before we move on, but there's so many smart people here, and these are such great ideas. Um, Thinking about, I mean, one of the things that we love about the Pike, and we've heard it represented both in these remarks and then our conversations and the chat, et cetera, is that most communities feel this, but I think we feel it very distinctly on the Pike, the tension between wanting to preserve and to protect the people who live on the Pike, who shop on the Pike, whose businesses are on the Pike, and yet also wanting to continue to grow the economy. And if you looked at Kate's slide a few moments ago, the amount of value that was created by going up and newer is uncontestable. And so how can we work? I mean, that really becomes one of the other cruxes, right? Is how do we work and forecast with those two tensions? And it also makes it a more complicated question for business owners, right? Because they're saying, well, we want to come into this market, but we also have a very stable legacy population that might not want to be going to Orange Theory or Soul Cycle, right? And I think just thoughts on that, about that tension and how does the community, landlords, businesses kind of think about both things as an and versus an or?
A good question.
I think we wrote these questions together. I take no credit. Anybody want to take it? That's going to be the big question. um,
Um, Matt, maybe you can remind me, but I remember the National Trust, probably in coordination with Main Street America, probably about 10 years ago, did a study where they indicated that the most competitive environment is where there's a mix of old and new. And, they were talking about buildings, but, one might argue that, the successful places we've got in the region, Georgetown, Clarendon to some extent, Old Town, there's a mix. So I don't necessarily, I think old and character defining and, legacy businesses, if you want to call them that, is something that can enrich that mix. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in either or.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. I don't think it's an either or, just like it's not a bricks versus digital, that it's actually enhanced when you combine them. I think in particular to Columbia Pike, what I would suggest is that it's not a one size fits all strategy. I mean, it's a very linear district. There are certainly, while I've not walked it, like there are certainly distinct areas or nodes that might be treated slightly differently. But I think that certainly like newer development can enhance, but at the same time, that newer development is also typically quite dependent on sort of the distinct environment that gets created by sort of legacy or older businesses or just unique, quirky businesses that you often find on a main street, whether it's the workforce that's being employed in those locations that want something unique and distinct that give it identity and not sort of an anywhere USA context, to amenities that often are found sort of in those spaces, whether it's unique restaurants or whatever that are independent and thriving. So I think there is that sort of synergistic connection between sort of the newer and the legacy or the independent kind of businesses that you can find in places like Columbia Pike. I think that, wait, just one quick thing. I think the critical thing though on making that statement is the tension I think also comes when it happens so fast that you have displacement issues and like in your own backyard, at the coming out of the University of Maryland is, the Small Business Anti-Displacement Coalition. SBAN has done really good work and case studies and, ensuring that we're offering that support. We're allowing for the market conditions to sort of catch up from a sales perspective, that we're not just displacing for the sake of displacing, because most studies, you look at places like in New York, where it's happened so fast, people have lost the identity that's been the part that attracted that new development in the first place. And so I think we want to be cognizant that we're not leaving folks behind, whether as residents or as businesses, when that development does come.
I think that's really good. And I think one of the things that, and Kate talked about this in her remarks, but one of the things that we have on the Pike that is not unique to the Pike, but does make it very distinct, is that we do have the form-based code, and we have been implementing the form-based code over 20 years. So that this is it. It gives people time to adjust, but it also seems like you're constantly dealing with these parcel by parcel loss gain equations, and I think it's hard to necessarily figure out. We are glad. I mean, one of our core values is that we have intentional, deliberate growth on the Pike, and we're very proud of our form-based code. But thinking about every time a project goes up, what do we lose? What do we gain? Is it's very, for lack of a better word, emotional for the community. And I think one of the things that, as I'm sitting here thinking, is that we can do as a county, as a partnership, is helping paint why this is good and why this still adheres to our overall community values and what we believe in. And part of that goes to my next question, is about business development. Kim has talked about what her businesses look for, but what can we all be doing at the county level, at the partnership level, to really support business development, which is often, to be honest, left to the private sector. Retail brokers will say, okay, I know of this location, or developers say, okay, I see this parcel for, but what can we be doing on a micro level, at a community level, to be supporting that business development? And I know Matt talked about some of those community capital things, but are there other things that we collectively can be thinking about business development?
Me to take
Yeah.
that. Oh, sorry. And so I think one of the things I see business plans a lot, and I get people who call me and email me a lot with, businesses that they want to open. And, my first question is always, if I haven't seen a business plan, please send it. And, when people include in their business plan the why, right? And they include in their business plan what their background is. And, I think since COVID, we have had a lot of people that have said, I don't want to do my corporate job anymore. I want to step back and I want to open a Pilates studio. I want to open a coffee shop. And, it comes with a lot of requirements, both from a time and a money perspective. And I think that that's where oftentimes things tend to fall through is there's really great ideas, but it's really hard to have a retail business and you need to have a team. I've seen it time and time again. I've worked with a lot of small business owners, a lot of women-owned businesses, and a lot of them have said to me, I shouldn't have done this by myself. And so, what I would say is, use the resources that AED has available. Use resources as you start to build a network and you talk to people who have a similar business or have done this before. And, look at franchise opportunities that provide support. I think, there's a lot of ways to open a new business. And there's a lot of resources available beyond just thinking that, you yourself can do it. I always encourage people to do a lot of research and do a lot of homework before you start looking for space, because that's not the first step.
Yeah, I think in the district there's a few agencies that are definitely first steps. Department of Small Local Business Development, Director Rosemary and her team, they definitely opened arms with business support, kind of like a first step. Department of Consumer Licensing and Protection. And then the Department of Buildings, this is the agency in the district that administers all occupancies. And one of the things that we did with the former director, Schropper, and the current director, Hanlon, there was we initiated a vacant to vibrant program or a pop-up permit program, which expedites occupancy in a vacant space of more than 6 months, and allowing a business owner who wants to try, firsthand in a space, like Kim said, where a property owner is willing to do a test fit, and kind of, advance in that aspect. And I actually want to take it back to the previous question where another kind of incentive that we've pushed on to property owners is really, taking on the risk, right? Where if it is a legacy space, it does require work. We use a lot of advertising and marketing dollars in a lot of the projects that we do. That's an industry that will never go away, no matter the climate of the economy. And so to be able to utilize funds where a property owner doesn't have to provide tenant improvement dollars or, again, things that are tied into those legacy leases, that also opens the door, but it also gives us leverage to say, hey, we don't want to be charged a specific amount of rent. We'll give you a percentage of sales. Percentage rent deals are starting to become more popular. And Kim, you can probably attest to this, but it's starting to become more popular because in some instances with a percentage rent, you have more flexibility in your business operations. And then in most instances, you generate more money than you would with a traditional rent. So it's a lot of dynamics around legislation and how a lot of legacy deals are done. So very hopeful for the Pike, and I'm excited to see what we can do in this area.
Thank you, Ian. Kate, I don't know if there's anything else. I mean, you talked about Biz Launch earlier, which is a
Yeah.
great asset. So
I was just going to add, so obviously there's kind of the wraparound support services for businesses. There's also, you all are probably aware, we do the Open Rewards program, which is just another way to encourage people to shop locally. It's a place where, businesses participate. They don't have to spend money. The county invests in that, and there's a rewards program for shopping local. But the third bucket that I wanted to go back to, because it was raised earlier, is just the whole placemaking side of all of this. The ability to do an event, a pop-up, a thing that generates excitement that's authentic to the place, I think is a huge part of the future and past of Columbia Pike. So getting kind of that village together, as Kim said, to do some of those projects, I think is another really viable and pragmatic path for the Pike. I'll do one shout out right now because the county did 2 pilot programs last year for placemaking grants. And one of those is actually opening this coming Friday night. It's called The Look and it's on Langston Boulevard. And it was a grantee awarded by the county to do a temporary pop-up art exhibit and interactive experience in an old Walgreens store. So that's an example. It's a temporary thing. It's only going to be there, I think, 3 weekends or 6 weeks. But that's an example that could be totally replicated on the Pike. I'm sure that, kind of even what you described, it can be done. It takes the village of, who's got the idea and then how do we get the right people in the room to figure out how do we get this done as quickly as possible and get that momentum. But I would just advocate that that's another kind of bucket of things that I think the county can help support as well, with all of the partners that we're looking at on the call today.
I think that is so helpful. And I think what we've all learned today is that it sometimes becomes a cliche, but it does not only takes a village, it takes different constituencies and different people who have very different motivations, right? I mean, Kim's clients have different motivations than the residents versus the folks who are trying to keep their rent as low as possible versus the people who've been here a long time but there is overlap and there are Venn diagrams where we're all in the same sweet spot. And I think what either the partnership can do, the county can do, creative people who are excited and committed to community can do, we can do these things together. We'll give our panelists a moment to think about all the things that they meant to say earlier, but we did get, as you can tell from the chat and then as part of the registration, we got a number of questions and I want to at least share just a couple of them. First of all, as we've alluded to, and for those of you who are in Arlington know that we had a very significant 2-year plus construction project on the Pike. For those of you who work in other jurisdictions and have other examples that you might be able to draw on, what are some ways that, and this question really came from BM Smith and Stephen, who works over there and helps work with retail, but what are things that other communities have done that have gone through either prolonged disruption or other strategies that we can use to increase foot traffic after something so, for lack of a better word, traumatic, right? And are there things that we can do to re-incentivize or revitalize or re-encourage more people coming to the Pike who might have said, I used to go to the Pike, but I don't anymore because of X, Y, or Z? And I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I can throw, I guess, a few. But I think you think of your district is not purely a retail play. It's about diversity of opportunity to explore the pipe, whether it's going to the post office or, going to an office space, coming to an event, just hanging out. I mean, one of the big evolutions in third space is what we call like plug-in places, where you're building community in retail businesses. I meant programming of spaces. So I just think it's like making sure that folks are aware that it's not purely a transactional play when you come, that you can enjoy in lots of diversity of ways and just being able to sort of market and brand yourself in that way.
Thank you. Anyone else want to? It's okay because I got more. Um,
I think Mark
the
makes
other,
a good point. I would say I think Mark makes a good point, right? I think what makes a really good corridor like Columbia Pike is the fact that you have people that are constantly traversing, right? Whether, you live in Arlington and you're going to the fields at Barcroft, right? And you're coming across Columbia Pike, depending on where you live, or you're going to Bailey's and you need to get back to Pentagon City. Like there's a lot of things, right, that can kind of be that sticky factor for Columbia Pike. And I think that that's the other piece to think about, right? Is, I think Matt makes a good point about, doing other things that then cause you to say, oh, let me go check out whatever this is. So I totally agree. I think it's a good point.
going back just 1 second to something that Ian and others have said is that we are celebrating. We might not have only 3 weekends of doing our pop up, but we're very excited about our Culture Fest on April 18th. That we're really trying to lean into all the people and the communities that make the Pike so special. And that's just one of the many things that we're doing. It's a shameless plug here, but we do have a weekly farmers market that really is one of the anchors of our community. We are revitalizing that. We've received some grant funding for that. And then if you haven't been to some of these restaurants, we have this monthly lunch club and our monthly happy hours that are trying to bring new folks into places that they didn't even either notice or hadn't been before. So I think all of these things can be activities that we can do. There are often things that can be barriers that we don't even know that they're barriers. So this last question that I have from the audience was, we have a lot of parking on the Pike. We have 3 public-private parking lots. They're in garages. We have limited street parking. But one of the most consistent complaints, we got 4 or 5 submissions about this, is that there's not sufficient parking on the Pike. So both parking specific and also, how do you address sentiments, whether they are accurate or not, with people who say, well, we don't go there because there's no place to park? Well, there are places to park. We just maybe need to do a better job telling about those places, or we just need to get people to the corridor. So parking specific or other kind of these either misconceptions or barriers that we might not be thinking about or even realizing. Any thoughts on that? I saw Matt nodding his head, but I don't know if anybody else.
Uh, I thought I was going to escape without a parking issue coming up. They always tend to park, but in simple form, one, it's highly complex. It's typically a management issue and not necessarily net space issue. But given the linear nature, the nodal factors that you have there, you really have to look at how do people use those particular areas? Because if you have retail that's sort of in and out, parking in a parking ramp is going to be problematic. But if it's more sort of like convenience and you've got some street parking, there's a match there. So I would look at it like, how does each one of those areas, what is the use and function? And then does the parking allow for those use and functions to be convenient, cost effective, what have you? It's hard to say like across the board, this is what you should do.
Yep. Thank you. So I just have 2 very specific things. We got a lot of questions about the development next to Penrose. That project is moving forward where the CVS was. We're hoping, as somebody said in the chat, for shovels and things to be in the ground by late fall. That's moving forward. You should see a crane there this summer because first they have to demolish it, things like that. The other question we got, and we talked about this last week on our prep call, as many of you will remember, the Harris Teeter was a loss. We lost the Harris Teeter at George Mason and Columbia Pike. And that becomes a problem for a lot of reasons, that there's not a good grocery store on the west end of the Pike. It might not meet the official definition of a food desert. But do you have any, and Kim, you might know more about this specifically, but what can the county or the residents or the partnership do to think about that? Because that's a very large, as Kate alluded to, that's a very large piece of square footage that is no longer bringing in business or creating community space. Anyone? Bueller?
I mean,
Sorry.
I worked on Centro on behalf of ownership when it was coming out of the ground. Harris Teeter was obviously the grocery store that signed on before all the other retail tenants. And, I really can't speak to, why they closed and, what they're going to do. But, what I would say is, I agree that it's a loss. And I agree that, it absolutely is something that should be programmed in the future. I think it's a huge advantage for the community to have something in that space. And it's also advantage for the people who live in that building.
Does does Harris Teeter still have the lease there, or?
They do.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to like the other issue, right? Where you have big box companies that are okay with taking a loss in a empty space. I mean, Walmart down on 8th Street in DC, that's a perfect example. They pay a substantial amount of money to Georgetown University every year just for it to remain empty. And unfortunately, there's no way around telling somebody, hey, don't take this money. Let's do this for the community. It's an unfortunate situation, but somebody's got to scream it at the top of their lungs that something's got to change.
Great. Well, we are just about out of time. I do want to thank our panelists for everything that they did and do for us today and for the greater community that we all share and live with. There are a lot of things coming up. I hope you will take advantage of them. There's a lot of ways to stay engaged. We've captured all these questions. Some of them will be better answered by our county colleagues. Some of them we can answer. But we are always asking for input and connection. And whether that means coming to our Pike Progress Lunch on March 26th, being an annual sponsor, I must put that plug in there, our lunch clubs, our farmers markets, I'm there most Sundays, Culture Fest, or just sending us an email, sharing something with us on social media. We really take our role as a community convener seriously, but we could not convene anybody if we didn't have partners, friends, colleagues, restaurants, retailers, residents to convene with us. And so I encourage you to reach out, check us out. We are on all the socials except TikTok because I'm not a good enough dancer, but you can find us most other places, columbiapike.org. And so until this, I see you again next on the Pike. On behalf of Nikki McDonald, our board chair, the entire CPP board, the Pike staff, who've done a great job preparing for this event and all of our events, and obviously our partners at Arlington County and our speakers today. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all you do to make our world such a great place.